pencil that's actually got a lead.
It's not often teachers have the chance to get together in the school hall without their students. But that's what the teaching staff at Wangels near Reading do at 2 p.m. every Wednesday.
In secondary schools, the tradition has been and still is for teachers to be rather isolated workers. Essentially, their working day is them in a room with however many students. So one of the things we're doing is to enable staff to come together to work on their own practice.
Hello folks, we wanted to start with what it meant if someone says that they do have an open mind. Now, you've got certain
The reason Wangels teachers get together every week is to hammer out the details of their school's transformation, especially in the Key Stage 3 curriculum.
telling them why you think they might be open-minded.
We're moving away from a sort of one-size-fits-all curriculum to a much more fluid and open kind of learning, which tries to tailor what's being offered and the opportunities available to the individual student. It is a major difference from what teachers have been used to doing up until now.
Could anybody say why they might think David Beckham is open-minded?
He wears sarongs, so therefore he's quite open-minded into how he dresses.
Exactly. Gender is open-minded.
The constraints of the timetable mean you can't necessarily go and observe colleagues who are doing something new. There is never enough time in an average full-time teacher's day to talk to other people and to do the research and to practice the skills, because when you're learning new skills yourself as a teacher, you make mistakes.
So this is what we're concentrating on: competencies, skills. So when you're going back
The
into
core
practice
skills they're
areas, if you
teaching,
could think
known as
about
CLIPS,
where you're developing
derive from the Royal
competencies,
Society of
where it
Art's
might be
Opening
to
Minds
successful
programme.
learners, how they
Using
approach
cross-curricular
your
project
particular
work,
subject,
they're teaching
particularly
CLIPS
with
throughout Year 7.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, in today's lesson, what we're going to be looking at is listening skills. If you just look at those competencies for relating
Teacher
to
Claire Roth is embarking on a Year 7
what
lesson
do you
entirely
expect
to do with
listening
skills.
will enable us to
These
tick
students
off
spend a
today?
third of their
Look,
week in
what
Opening Minds classes.
You're not only going to know about stuff, you're going to evaluate. What does that word mean? Yes, Jack?
It's like to look back and like see what you've done well and see what you've not done well.
Brilliant. Okay, so we're going to evaluate how our current listening skills affect the quality of communication.
We do need to move away from what I would call a 19th century culture and education to one that makes children fit for the 21st century.
We're going to be experiencing...
We're training or educating children in the skills of being able to be lifelong learners.
And understand how people feel when they're not being listened to. You're going to set yourselves a challenging target. I will be an active listener when I show it by.
We've just finished a different unit, and the quality of the speaking and the interaction and the enthusiasm was fantastic, but the listening was not always what I wanted it to be. So the idea is that they will just refresh their listening skills.
All right, what I need is somebody who's prepared to be listened to, somebody who's prepared to take a risk.
It's much more important than just regurgitating information.
With the whole
You can look
class.
information up, you can go on the internet, you can go to a library, you can talk to other people.
It's a little bit
It's
dodgy,
much more
a little bit
important to have
dynamite.
skills that are transferable to other subjects. Skills you need for
You
life.
have to read it nice and loud.
Our topic is favourite TV programmes or music. A and B both talk at each other as loudly as you can, but do not listen at all.
My brain hurts. Okay, so let's ask Rebecca first of all. How was it for you?
It wasn't very good because nobody was listening to each other.
Yes, sir.
I liked it because it shows, like, if you don't listen to each other, how bad it can get.
So can we agree that that probably was not good, effective listening, yeah?
One of the issues, I think, in schools like this is that because it's relatively high achieving, change is actually quite difficult to initiate because people tend to get a view that things are okay, leave them as they are.
But this is the hardest one. I hate it when I'm talking to somebody and they go, yeah.
The school only adopted the Opening Minds approach after it had done a pilot with the top set of Year 7 pupils.
So what you're going to do is there's many different ways to show you're bored.
It was successful. We were able to show to perhaps sceptical parents that their child's education wasn't being negatively affected, in fact quite the reverse.
Don't you just hate it when people really ignore you?
Part of this process is to give the students themselves much more ownership of their own learning.
What are you having for lunch?
We've got at least another 3 years to go in order to really embed that kind of change across the curriculum.
Right, now, this afternoon we've got a staff development session. Do you remember those Wednesday?
Because change is complicated, the school's monitoring how children who've moved on from opening minds are making progress. These children are now in Year 8.
For instance, I'm thinking you've gone back into sort of history and geography, subjects like that there was no time for as discrete subjects last year. Have you found that because you don't know things, you haven't got the content behind you, has that hampered your learning at all? Because we predicted it might.
I think it's okay going back into history and geography because we did cover a bit in clips anyway.
Good, so you don't feel like your learning has been held back in that way?
No.
Have you ever had an experience where your preferred learning style is one way and the teacher's preferred teaching style is a different thing altogether and the two have clashed?
Like when we had clips, history and geography, we learned to do it more by making a presentation or working in groups to do something about it, but we just have to sit down and copy from the book and it's really boring and we just have to write things down.
Do you think Year 8 are better learners or worse learners than they would have been without clips?
I think they're better because they know how to handle things a lot more than they would have done.
It's part of the school's commitment to reflective innovation that these children were asked to write down how they thought they'd changed as learners and the challenges this might pose.
We knew that anyone who taught clips.
We're going to talk about the Year 8 learners as they come into Year 8 from our Year 7 Opening Minds group. What sort of characteristics?
For the teachers too, it's important to reflect together on the new kinds of learners they're producing.
Perhaps negative.
They don't have to wait to be told, do it this way, do it that way. They will do it in the way that they see.
They'll also be aware of their own strengths, so they'll know what their preferred learning style is.
They're using techniques like brainstorming, mind mapping, visual representations of their thoughts much more readily.
We found they're not able to use geographical skills like field sketching, annotating photographs that they would have been doing in Year 7. What they are better at is actually researching information and evaluating it.
They find it very frustrating to copy stuff out of textbooks, even if it's sort of answering structured questions. And they don't like essay writing because it's too much of a block of text in one go, and they just don't want to do that. They just want to whiz around and do a bit of research and put down keywords somewhere.
Yeah. Which, of course, as a teacher, you do need them to be able to do those longer bits of writing. They've got to learn those skills, so it's about balancing it out. What about teamwork? Have we mentioned that?
Are we doing loads and loads of teamwork in Year 7, then when we go into Year 8, we're suddenly expecting them to be independent learners all the time, instead of having sort of team-based projects that they're doing so much of in Year 7. And that, in turn, can create issues, I think.
Well, that's one of the problems, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because we're trying to give them the skills that we know they'll need, later in life in the workplace that we're exhibiting here. But in fact, to get to that point, they have to go through this very much individual approach, individual assessment, but we want them to get a balance. You talked about them using mind maps and having different ways of working. You're obviously giving them opportunities to do that, but I would say that they're not always getting those opportunities in what they're being asked to do in Year 8.
Going into a normal run-of-the-mill lesson where they do textbook work, video recall work, I think they do feel a bit constrained with that.
They're not necessarily used to just doing content, which is what they haven't really got from the Opening Minds.
They've got to take on board a certain amount of knowledge in Year 8 in a way that they weren't maybe necessarily expecting to in Year 7 because they were concentrating on process.
Do they need the sheer content at the moment? Yes, they do with the way that Key Stage 3 is structured, but actually moving on forward, do they need all that content? If we're teaching these skills and things like that, do we alter the curriculum whereby it gives them more opportunities to do more team building and things like that and take out some of the content?
Cool, okay. So here's our beautiful food chain. Now, there's only one of these organisms that can actually take sunlight and convert it into sugar.
Even in this traditionally content-heavy Year 9 science class, the teacher's still committed to using a skills-based approach.
Light energy into sugar. The problem with secondary education has been that it's compartmentalised into content-based subjects, and students find it very difficult to transfer skills they learn in one subject into another subject because they treat it as a different subject. Hold your hands out. You're expecting a lot then? Why is he expecting a lot of energy? In our lesson today, we're looking at the flow of energy in food chains, but we're also going to be bringing into that discussion skills, compare and contrast skills. They're looking for differences, they're looking for similarities, they're looking for links, effective thinking skills. So when Wiggly Worm comes along and eats it, there's only about 10% of the energy that's passed on in the food chain. As you move from producer to consumer, there are three big patterns. Something's going to happen as we move along the food chain. The
population will decrease.
Thank you, brilliant one. The population's going to start getting lower and lower and lower as we move on. Fox, we're going to be looking into investigative skills questions. The pros and cons of factory farming and how that impacts on the flow of energy in a food chain and how farmers can manipulate that. We need to take this model now and we need to develop our thinking, apply it to how a pig farmer might use this to maximise the growth of big pigs. Why do we want big pigs? Big money. Big money. Big pigs, big money.
Right, what we're going to do today is we're going to do some peer mentoring. You've been paired up with students in different year groups so that you can have...
The school's also interested in breaking down the system of age-related year groups. It's using these lunchtime learning groups to experiment.
Traditionally in schools, students are grouped according to age and can be offered more or less the same thing at the same time.
What subject are you most happy with and most achieving?
The subject I'm most happy with would probably be science.
So within each learning group of about 20 students, we will have 2 to 3 of each of the traditional year groups. Those students are beginning to see themselves as co-learners rather than as people who they normally wouldn't have any connection with at all in a school. So the movement, ideally, will be, over the next 2 or 3 years, to bring that way of teaching and learning into the academic curriculum.
Learning, that's often reduced to learning styles, but we see it as a lot more.
Teachers at Wangels have to deal with many challenges as the school seeks to produce new kinds of learners. These Wednesday afternoon sessions are critical because they allow teachers to share their experiences of the classroom. A classroom made very different by the impact of innovation on their students.
I find that they're more willing to argue with what you're trying to sort of say because they've been learning in so many different ways.
So they have the right to kind of challenge whatever you
Yes.
say and pick it up.
That's right, yeah.
It feels like it's an argument when they're probably just questioning.
Yeah.
And then, could we do this a different way, or there must be a better way of doing this, or do I really have to do that?
Which a lot of teachers are going to find
very
difficult.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Therese, them questioning what you're doing is actually a healthy thing.
It's moving from a traditional point of view of the teacher being the giver of information, though, isn't it? To them bouncing ideas off each other and you're facilitating that. Yeah. And for a lot of teachers, that's going to be a hard shift it's going to be to let go of those reins is a difficult thing. But that's what's going to happen if we're doing this opening mind stuff. It's going to develop kids who are willing to do that.
Perhaps there's some mileage for some more CPD or some inset, on how do people incorporate the skills that they're learning in opening minds within the Year 8 lessons and on. Not just Year 8 lessons, but what we're saying really is that it's got to be across the curriculum Years 7 to 13 really.